Two of my favorite books of all time, one of the most disturbing books ever published in the United States, one of the greatest debuts novels in the history of American fiction, and one of the books I hate the most. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to discuss 5 modern American classics which I do not think could be published, at least in the form they exist in today. This video was inspired by a video from Allison over at Allison Talks Books, in which she talked about this same subject, looking kind of, I think, more at worldwide classics. The books she was looking at and kind of talking about how they couldn't be published today, at least in the form they exist today, were Les Miserables, Jane Eyre, the Iliad, the Odyssey, those kind of books. And what she focused on was about how those books are digressive. How the authors of those books or those stories digress and kind of like what we think of, go down rabbit trails or go off on tangents and spend dozens, hundreds of pages talking about things which may not be all that important to the plot. What I want to talk about are these 5 modern American novels and why I don't think they can be published in the form they are today, based on either their style or their content, or both. Now, a couple of caveats. By the way, I'll leave a link to Allison's channel and to her video down below. Great channel, great video. But I do want to make a couple of caveats in my list. Number one, notice I'm saying they couldn't be published today without changes. And I believe that all these books would have to be rewritten before any American publisher would think about publishing them today. And that rewriting means that they would automatically be changed. Also, I want to point out, I'm not saying it's wrong that we wouldn't publish these books in the form they're in today. One of the things I think we oftentimes do is we look at the past and assume that things were better in the past because what was produced in the past is considered to be classic. I have bad news for you, or maybe good news for you, depending on how you want to look at this. At some point, books that are being written and produced right now, somebody will consider them classics. They will be considered modern classics, not modernist classics, but modern classics. That is going to happen. If you went all the way back to the 1860s and were looking at and asked someone if they thought the work of Charles Dickens would last, you'd have varying opinions about that. And we know that the works of many authors almost didn't really become what we think of them about today's classics. So every time period in history publishes books differently. Just as I'm saying these books wouldn't be published today, they certainly wouldn't have been published in the Victorian period. Does that mean that Victorian sensibilities were completely wrong and then they didn't produce great literature? No, it doesn't. So I'm not condemning today, I'm not condemning the past in this kind of evaluation of these books. So enough of my kind of like lead in, let me get to the books right away. So the first book that I think couldn't be published in the way that exists today is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is a pretty easy pick, I think, because we see The Bluest Eye by Morrison, which, by the way, is, I think, the greatest debut novel ever published in the United States of America. The thing that makes it easy to put that book in this list is that The Bluest Eye is one of the most banned books in the United States of America. And I think if that book were coming out today, that you'd see a lot of publishers, back away from it because of its content. Now, the book is brilliant. It is painful to read. It is a deeply wrenching look at the way in which American society puts beauty standards and standards of behavior and expectations out there in the world which really don't fit everybody. And in this case, they don't fit the reality of a very young black girl. They don't fit her reality. And she wants to be beautiful like the white people she sees on TV, and she wants to have blue eyes, and the story then kind of revolves around the reality, I think, that faces young black women in the United States of America. The reason I don't think it can be published today is for 2 reasons. One, its style is pretty out there. You don't think about this when you're reading the book, but it begins and ends with these sections where we have these kind of repetition of lines and images. At the beginning, they come from the old, Dick and Jane books, which were readers that elementary school readers, even as young as me, read in the first grade, which produced this kind of idealized life, vision of family life and home life and what that was like which obviously this book stands in contrast to. So there's some kind of modernist aspects to that. In addition to that, the book does contain depictions and scenes of sexual violence against children, against this young girl. And it shows us a world in which this is not uncommon. And therefore, I think today, because of that topic, publisher would find it difficult to publish it the way it is today. They might be able to change it, keep some of the same core ideas, but I don't think they could have it exactly the way it was. And I'm not going to go into that because that kind of spoils some aspects of the book. So The Bluest Eye is the first one of the American kind of classics, modern American classics. I don't think will be published in its existing form today. By the way, just one more definition. I decided the book had to be at least 50 years old for me to consider it a modern American classic. So The Bluest Eye is the youngest of these books. All right, the second book on my list is The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. So famously, this is one of those books which is supposed to be really hard to read. It's told from kind of a close stream of consciousness by four characters about a fifth character who really who doesn't have her own section of the book. And it kind of details the collapse of the once kind of well thought of Compson family into increasing poverty, into family dissolution, and alcoholism, and all kinds of other kinds of social problems. 4 sections. The first 3 are told by Caddy Compson's brothers, Benji, Quentin, Jason. The last section told by Dilsey, their housekeeper, their black housekeeper, tells the 4th section. And it really is about the decline of this family and kind of how that is represented by Caddy, the sister, and her sexual misadventures, and then her daughter kind of following along the same way, but also the collapse of the family. The thing that makes the book difficult to read, or most difficult to read, is the first section is told from the point of view of Benji, who is mentally disabled. He was born with a mental disability, which means he's going to remain childlike in his view of everything for his entire life. And that does make it difficult to read. So I think that Benji section and the way in which we see Benji treated oftentimes by his family members, I think that would be one of those things that editors today would want changed. Not to mention the style. I don't know that a major publisher would go anywhere near a book with that many points of view, that many different stream of consciousness, or at least 3 stream of consciousness sections, and then the depiction of Benji, which is on the whole sympathetic. But also it kind of betrays the time period in which the book was written, the 1930s, and how that mental disability would have been looked on by society as a whole. So I don't think The Sound of the Fury would be published for that reason, but also for the format it takes. Again, the story is an interesting one, a compelling one. And maybe a publisher would say, or an editor would say, hey, if you rewrite this, as from a one POV stream of consciousness, we could maybe get it published. But I don't think it could be published in the way it exists today. The third book on my list, I think, is also probably a really easy pick for this list, and that's Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I don't know that there is a more controversial book in the United States of America that's been around this long. It has to be just as disturbing to read today as it was to read when it was first published. Hey, you have to lay down. I'm doing something. You have to lay down. I'm doing something. I'm not stopping. So Lolita is the story of a grown man's obsession and assault on a 12, 13-year-old girl who he calls Lolita. We are in the mind of this man, Humbert, and he is a monster. He's a monster for what he does. He's a monster for how he justifies it. And the book is disturbing for the way in which it puts us in the mind of the monster. This is, the ultimate, in lots of ways, unreliable narrator. He justifies his obsession with this young girl. He justifies his assaults on this young girl. He admits on page 1, this is not the first time he's done this. He is an individual who is doing an awful thing and becoming increasingly possessive of this young girl for tragic consequences for her. Violence ensues, and he never really comes to grip with the fact that he is, in fact, the monster at the center of this story, because it involves, essaying of a early teen girl and from the point of view of the perpetrator. It is one of those books that's easy to misunderstand. You know, Nabokov is not justifying, he's not saying this is right. In fact, he's saying the opposite. So a lot of people don't like the book because of its subject matter, and I think because of its subject matter, you would not see it published today, much less in the format that it's published. You might see the story of, you know, a predator like Humbert Humbert told in third person, where he's clearly the villain. I mean, the reader doesn't have to figure that out through, you know, go wading through what he himself has to say. But I don't think the book today can be published the way it is. Okay, the fourth book on the list is one of my favorite books. Again, like The Sound of the Fury, one of my absolute favorite books. The fourth book on the list is Another Country by James Baldwin. Okay, so if you've read any books by James Baldwin, you should know that there are no wholly likable characters in his books. There are no characters who are without serious, serious flaws. Think about Giovanni's Room and the way in which the character of, I think his name is David, behaves. The way he treats his friend, the way he treats his lover Giovanni, the way he treats his fiancée are pretty despicable. And yet we understand his point of view and the pressures he's under. In the same way, whose main character, Rufus Scott, is at once a sympathetic character who you can see the impact of racism and the you know, white gaze on his life, but at the same time, you know, he is abusive to the white woman that he is in a relationship with, and we see, you know, very vividly drawn scenes of essay or consensual, you know, sexual activity between he and his girlfriend. He certainly isn't a kind person to her, and so we're left with this kind of really vivid character who we understand, you know, where he comes from, but at the same time, we would condemn his behavior, perhaps today more than back then. So I think this aspect of Rufus Scott's character would be something that publishers would want Baldwin to change. One of the great things about Another Country is I have a hard time believing it was published at all, given that content of interracial relationships in the time the book was published around 1960. The drug use, the bisexuality, the cheating on the wives, you know, there are all kinds of things in this book which, you know, probably were shocking for people to read in 1960. I don't know how many people read the book then, but make the book really powerful. But I think it's just that element of Rufus Scott's abusive conduct towards his girlfriend, and then other elements in the way in which women are treated in the book, which would make it difficult for a publisher to publish today. And so I don't think it could be published as it is in today's world. And the last book on my list is the book that I mentioned at the beginning that I hate, and that's Gone with the Wind. And I don't think Gone with the Wind can be published in the United States of America today for two reasons. One, it's incredibly long, and to get kind of closer to what Allison was talking about, it's pretty digressive, and it can be really boring at times, if you want my personal opinion. Scarlett O'Hara is a really interesting character, and if there's an achievement from the book, it's the creation of that character who is now, you know, kind of an archetypal character in fiction and literature. If there's an achievement in the book, it's that. But the book is racist. I have a whole video about this. I know people are going to want to argue with me that the book is just set during a time period in which racism took place. You know, there are passages in the book that are not where racist messages are conveyed, and they're not conveyed through the mouths of characters. They are in the author's voice. And like I said, I have a whole video. I'll leave it at the end of this. You can go watch that and, you know, see my detailed breakdown of the racism in Gone with the Wind. To give you some idea of how racist the book is, I think, though. You know, if you've seen the movie Gone with the Wind, you've seen a toned down version of the racism that exists in Gone with the Wind. In the movie Gone with the Wind, they don't use the N-word. In the movie Gone with the Wind, you know, it's not explicitly a movie in which we see, Ashley Hamilton and Scarlett's first husband, second husband, whatever, second husband, actually go out and attack a group of black people as members of an organization like the KKK. In the movie, we don't know that Rhett Butler has been put in jail for killing a black man for speaking in an uppity way to a white woman. This racism that's in the book is, only hinted at in the movie. So if in 1939 they thought they had to tone the racism down for the movie, the racism in the book must be much more pronounced, and I'm here to tell you it is. And I don't think it could be published at all in that way. I think it would have to be much shorter, which would probably be a blessing for those who choose to read it, and that racist element would have to be removed from the book. One of the things I think is interesting, one of my own theories about Gone with the Wind while I'm on the topic, is that Margaret Mitchell admires Melanie far more than she does Scarlett. And I think that seems obvious, that Melanie seems like this strong woman who's understanding, who is loyal to Scarlett, even though she knows everything there is to know about Scarlett, she's still loyal to her. And in the movie, that's why she seems admirable. In the book, she's admirable because she refuses to deal with Yankees. She keeps a man in her house as kind of a protector who is an out-and-out violent racist. And she defends that. She kind of represents the attempt to maintain that, antebellum Southern way of life. And so I think that's who Mitchell observes, particularly when you know that Mitchell's favorite author was, the author of some of the same books that inspired the racist movie Birth of a Nation. But enough of that. I don't think that Gone with the Wind could be published today in the form it is. And I think one proof of that is, and how prevalent racism is there has not been another adaptation, I don't think, of the book Gone with the Wind since it came out in 1939. Anyway, there you go. There are my 5 modern American classics that I don't think can be published today, or at least not published in the form that they exist today. If you want to, argue with me, hopefully respectfully, please leave those comments in the comment section below. Or if you just want to say anything else in the comment section, please feel free. And as always, thank you for watching.